Thanks. Can you hear me? So we're in the local time zone part of the program now. No snazzy intro music. Sometimes the mention of a place can conjure up an image, a situation, an emotion. Africa. Now think about Africa in the context of global development. Now raise your hands if you thought of poverty. Raise your hands if you thought of conflict or corruption. Raise your hands if you thought of strength. Good. That's what I want to talk about today, is strength in Africa. Now many of us, when we think about Africa, we think about issues piled on issues. It seems daunting and complicated and far away, and we wonder who's going to fix it. And we wonder who will save Africa. Some of us actually make it out there, whether it be on safari or through Peace Corps or another route. And usually what happens is that we come away so impressed by the warmth and the humanity of people that we make a commitment. And sometimes that commitment to help people becomes an organization, and sometimes it becomes a lifelong calling. Right now, at latest count, there are about 300 Africa-focused nonprofits in the Bay Area alone, all of them arising out of individuals' experience and commitment. But I can tell you, that's a hard road, which I think you'll hear about from Carmel as well. Thousands and thousands of hours of work, a learning curve that's very steep, decoding and navigating new cultures, begging and raising money, and being anxious about whether it's actually making a difference. So today, I want to talk about a somewhat different direction, and that is not us saving them, but about us helping them do work that they are very capable to do, and to lend a hand in that way. I want to do this by going through 3 vignettes. And the first one starts here in Santa Cruz with a local couple, an ordinary couple who did something extraordinary. In 1999, Dave Katz and Carrie Olson had moved to California from Michigan. Dave was a software engineer, sported a ponytail, and had a rock band in his spare time. Carrie had run daycare centers and had just earned a PhD in child development. Their world changed in 1999 when they came into wealth through a dot-com IPO. Now, Dave had worked very hard. He codes like no one I know. But he realized, and Carrie realized, that they hadn't really earned all that money. It wasn't all theirs. They felt a strong desire to share it with people and to use it where it would do great good. Since Carrie had a strong interest in children, they decided to found the Firelight Foundation, which was focused on helping children affected by HIV/AIDS in Africa. But how would they do that work? What would it do? What would it focus on, and what would they do? Now, Carrie does her homework. She's a very thorough individual. So she talked to several dozen people, starting with the White House advisor on AIDS, digging up people who were working in the field in Africa on the ground, and asked them what do they think she should do. And the answers were daunting, but they were also really uplifting. First thing was daunting. 12 million children who'd lost one or both parents to HIV/AIDS. You can imagine what that would do to the worlds of those kids, but also to their communities and to the future of their countries. But then the uplift started. 95% of kids who had lost both parents were still in a family situation, being raised by grandparents, by older brothers and sisters, by aunts and uncles. 90% of the support they were getting from people they saw face-to-face every day, neighbors, their own families, not from governments and not from international aid. Carrie learned the word Ubuntu, a Bantu word meaning humanity, meaning we're all in this life together and we know that we can call on you when we need you. She learned the Swahili word harambe, let's pull together to make things happen. And she also learned that in virtually every community in Africa, there is a group that's working on behalf of kids, and they do it much more cheaply and effectively than most of the people coming in from the outside. So they decided they would take their money and support organizations already doing work on the ground. And over 13 years, we've granted about $16 million to 330 organizations helping 250,000 kids. Now what Carrie and Dave learned, which I think is much more important than those statistics, is that community is one of the strongest and well-distributed assets in Africa. And community-based organizations work in two primary ways. They extend the services provided by the state, and they support fragile households in raising their kids. So I wanted to tell two stories that illustrate each of those things. And the first one goes a bit into my own background before coming to Firelight. I grew up here in California, but knew I wanted to work internationally, and that I wanted to do something that was of service. So 4 days after college, I found myself training to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. I was a teacher there, loved Morocco, gained a lifelong passion for education, and it launched me on a career in development. A few years later, I found myself going out to Mali in West Africa to be the deputy director of the Save the Children field office there. Now, it was a really exciting time because 6 months earlier, a 23-year-long dictatorship had been overthrown. And there was all sorts of positive energy, open horizons, and possibility. Mali had just signed on to a worldwide commitment for education for all, promising to get all of its children into school. But we realized in talking to government officials, they really didn't know how they were going to do that. And they really, beyond the paper, didn't have the strongest of commitments. So, and the odds were pretty daunting too. If you looked at it, the Malian government was spending 25% of its national budget on education and getting 20% of primary school age kids into school. Forget about secondary school, and there was no university in the country. 1 in 20 rural girls was going to school. And the education system was very centralized. The Minister of Education had to sign off on the creation of every school. So we thought, you know, how might things be changed in order to make this a reality? I had a colleague there, Malian guy. I was one of 2 non-Africans in a staff of 100 there. His name was Bakary Keita. He was yay high, very dignified, always in Malian bubu robes, but also homespun sort of sense of humor and knowledge about what communities could do. And we would sit under, in the balmy African night, in our short sleeves until 2 in the morning, talking about how we could make this happen, education for all. And we basically hatched an idea about helping every community in the area that we worked in start a school. The area, Kolonjeba, was about 10,000 square miles, no running water, no electricity, no paved roads. 225 villages, only 20 of them had schools. But basically, we believed that it would be possible to make a big change in that based on 3 ideas. One, that every community, no matter how poor, had the resources, human and financial, in order to start a school. That you could reduce the cost of the government model of schooling by 90%, both the infrastructure and the salary package, without reducing quality in rural areas. And that the time was right for a real partnership between government, civil society, and communities. And I think we were right. We started with 4 schools 6 months later. 2 years later, there were 20. And over the course of 8 years, Save the Children and its Malian NGO partners helped 800 communities start schools. That's a 40% increase in the number of schools in the country. 45,000 students, half of them were girls. And those schools were financially sustainable. They were financed locally, and 10 years after outside funding has stopped, they're still going strong. So what we learned there is that community is not just a nice to have, it's a powerful force. And when it works together with the state, it can provide a lot. African states are trying very hard to provide services to their people, their children, their families, but they are resource constrained and often lack skill. And usually they overlook the most abundant and renewable resource in Africa, which is solidarity, the willingness of people to work together. So when you bring those 2 things together, you can do amazing things. Now, third vignette is about how community-based organizations support households. And you can imagine there are a few things that impact a household more than a disease like AIDS, which attacks people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Children lost their parents, lost their teachers, lost the people that they would look up to, who would be their role models. Girls had to leave school to care for sick parents. Basically, HIV was very difficult in terms of children's lives and their prospects. A Malawian man named Said Wame, some of you may have met him when he was in Santa Cruz last year. He spoke here at Cruzeiro. Very modest, friendly guy, but incredibly impressive what he's done. He was orphaned himself. He had one change of clothing, one shirt, one pair of shorts that he washed every night so he could wear it again the next day. He didn't have a pair of shoes until he was 12. And yet he has put together an organization that has a network of 5,000 volunteers that are helping tens of thousands of kids in southern Malawi. He told us about, in the mid-90s, it was quite common in Malawi and in other countries in southern Africa to run into a funeral in every village every day. People were dying with distressing regularity. And he knew that the community could be called on to fill in gaps that were created by that, but that it would be stronger if community members were trained and well supported. They started in HIV/AIDS awareness and prevention, but they quickly branched out into other things that kids and families needed: maternal health, access to school, counseling for bereaved kids, vocational education. He started with a budget of $0 and a lot of commitment, working village to village, and now has a budget of $100,000, which is quite impressive in an area like Malawi. One of the things that Said says that I remember the most is no matter what happens, our volunteers are there. The rainy season blocks all the roads and you can't get there from the capital. Doesn't matter, we're there. Strife in the capital and people can't get out, we are there. Electricity goes out, internet goes down, countryside cut off, only from the capital, we are there. And Firelight is very proud to be supporting people like Said. Pulling back a bit, these vignettes illustrate a very widespread phenomenon. There are hundreds of thousands of community-based organizations in Africa. The value of the labor of people who work in these organizations in Southern Africa is $5 billion a year, a large multiple of the value of any country's aid to Africa. It's not necessary for an organization like Firelight to invent a program and try to find out how to take it to scale in Africa. If you look at it, scale is already there. These organizations are in every community. They have drive, they have skill, and they have track record in mobilizing around kids. What they lack often is a bit of cash that they may need for tin roofs, for cement, for sewing machines, for bicycles, some organizational capacity, and networks. These are the sorts of things that Firelight and other organizations like us try to provide. Now, they're also a really good bet. We follow quite closely the money that we've granted over the years, and we track on both the activities were done and that the money was well used. In 11 years, we have only 2% of what we've granted that hasn't been fully reported on, and only 0.5% that hasn't been charitably used. And I think that flies very much in the face of people's worries about corruption and money going astray in Africa. The thing that keeps money safe at the grassroots is the number of eyes on the cash box, and there are a lot of them. There may be 60, 70 people in the room right now. There would be that many pairs of eyes on a cash box. Now, for those of you who might have thought that African issues are daunting or complicated or far away, there are some ways that you can help. Okay? The first is just believing. Okay? I think we're all guilty from time to time of thinking that Africa is just condemned to poverty, that for our entire lives we'll be hearing on the news about this disease and that coup and this problem. When I was born, Kenya had the same economic level as Korea. And it was not inevitable that one grew and the other did not. And the possibility of growth is still there. I and my colleagues are very strongly motivated by a belief that all of Africa's children and the adults they become should stand shoulder to shoulder with all others, that they should share in the world's prosperity and that they should contribute to the solution of its problems. Belief is important. Second, share the word. If you know that there are organizations out there that are doing amazing things, let people know, especially if the message that others hear is gloom and doom and disappointment. Third, support. For those of you that may be moved, there are many organizations like Firelight that are doing similar things. I have a list of global grassroots grant makers that are working either for children, for women's issues, for the environment, Africa, Latin America. I believe that over the next decade, it will become much more common for individuals in industrialized countries to be able to identify, reach out to, and support organizations at the grassroots that they wouldn't have been able to support 20 years ago. That grassroots to grassroots solidarity will grow over the next 10 years. We celebrate it and we welcome people into it. So thinking back, Carrie Olson was able to figure out how to identify and learn to support solid grassroots organizations in Africa. Bakary Keita in Mali knew that communities could increase educational opportunity, and he helped them do that. Said Wame knew that his volunteers would always be there, and he ensured that they were well supported. These three people never met one another. They lived thousands of miles apart from one another, and they followed very different paths. But their thinking had a common thread. What did they think of when they thought of Africa? They thought of strength. And that's an idea worth sharing. Thank you.